Welcome to Meet Me at the Wall. A podcast exploring author Anne Goodwin's time-traveling journey after discovering hundreds of letters written to her grandmother over a century ago. We visit the space where fact meets fiction, truth fosters imagination, and delve into the past while keeping an eye on how lessons from history affect us today and even tomorrow. We have gathered once again, and here we are.
Well, first of all, let's just have a little moment of thankfulness that it's not mowing right now.
Oh, yes. There was mowing going on. And that is the thing when you don't live out in the country all by yourself, right?
So, right.
I'm kind of curious. I know we were talking about all these letters, of course, that you've received from your grandmother that were sent to her. I believe you're in search of letters that your grandmother sent to others.
I am.
And we had a close call.
We
just
did.
Last week. In fact, of the three of us were prepping for this episode, and we're all excited because you received this package in the mail.
I did. I received a packet from Maeve, who's the daughter of the girl with the curl on the wall, and it had letters in it, and we were so excited. But it ended up she was just returning letters of her mother's that I had given to her and sort of forgotten, and was so thankful that she did return them.
We were all pretty excited. We even turned on the recording on the Zoom so that we could capture the moment, which we're not going to bother sharing now. Anyway, as you like to say, Anne, pulling a thread from the last episode, we learned a little bit about Ted.
Yes. I was mentioning in our last episode, Ted is Florence's brother. He was in World War I as an ambulance driver in Italy and came back, and as Betsy commented, went back to join his peers in college right after the war. And we just talked about how unusual that situation would be for all that he had experienced, then to go back to campus life. So it ended up, we keep what we call an amazement journal. What amazed me today journal is how I start the entries when trying to figure out how we would record what was happening in the office, because that's part of the journey. We decided that pen and ink was the way to record it as opposed to video. So I came across this entry from January 22 regarding Ted, and I'll read it to you. Today I visited Ted pre-war 1917. He was determining his path for signing up, thought he was just investigating, and found himself enlisted at the fairgrounds with nothing, had just left for a day trip. He chose the ambulance corps and then confessed to his 16-year-old sister that he could have chosen to work in his father's factory, the oil refinery business, which had a deferment since they were a defense contractor. He chose to go to war instead. Did his parents know his options? Oh my mother heartstrings are lurching. So that is how Ted ended up going to war. He went to the fairgrounds to investigate what it was all about and found himself enlisted with nothing. And his mother and his family didn't see him again.
Wow.
He was just whisked off at that point.
He was.
Right.
Wow.
And he had a deferment, and he chose not to take it.
He could have, so he chose to go.
He chose to go.
Unfortunately, he came back. I mean,
he did.
Yes.
He came back with an Italian War Cross, which is a high honor as an ambulance driver, which sort of must explain why he was a little bit more mature in his college years when he came back than others might have been.
Another thing that comes to mind, and Betsy and Anne, we've talked about earlier, I think in episode 1, the kind of archival quality that these letters took on because they lasted so long, 100 years or more for many of them. And today's electronics and everything in the cloud, and you send off texts and tweets and everything, very different. But ephemera and these artifacts that you have, and by the way, I had to look this up because I think that's a really cool word. And from the Greek, ephemeros means for the day. So it was things like train tickets and dance cards and postcards. And what of that do you have besides the letters that you can think of?
We have a special hat box that is full of ephemera, I would say. And we have something really interesting. Now, this is just a piece that confounded us, and we found out that the name of it is called a chatelaine. And it's a housekeeper's, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, a housekeeper, it's the housekeeper's tool belt. And on this tool belt, which she would hook to her waist, and it would just drape down in different strings of chain, are things like a pencil, a piece of ivory for her to write on, a shoe hook. I think a couple of things are missing.
I like it.
We also found a dance card, which was a really fun little artifact with a little very slender pencil tied to it.
And another thing are some old cookbooks, like the Titusville cookbooks. But even more interestingly enough is my great-grandmother kept an entertainment journal. So she would write down, and this would be by the day, every day that she went somewhere, everything that she ate, who was there, what if it was at her home, what was served. So things like sunshine cake. We had to go to the cookbook to find out what in the world a sunshine cake is.
And today we text pictures of our meal to our friends, right?
Exactly.
So it's a little bit different, but
the same.
It's the same,
it's the
exactly.
Same. We just keep record and we connect.
Yeah.
And lots of photographs as well.
Sure.
I assume they would be considered to be ephemera for the day.
Absolutely. That is part of the definition, I think. And it's nice that you have things besides just the letters. And you probably will discover more. Who knows?
What about baby hair?
Oh, I don't.
First haircut. We have that.
Yeah, sure.
We still save those.
We do.
Well, I have probably, 100-year-old lock of hair.
What about the logistics and function of these letters and what they meant to our ancestors to stay connected? Today, we call people from anywhere. You don't even have to be at the phone tied to the wall. You can call from anywhere at any time. How was that so important back then, right? Because you had to think about a letter, write a letter, post it.
It's a societal commonality that we have. We as human beings want to be connected with other human beings. And so what's so fascinating is finding that the urgency that our ancestors had in writing letters to each other, as the post was delivered twice a day, and they're looking for it, and they're taking time to write twice a day, is the same need for connection that we have just pushed forward in our technology. We are constantly looking to connect. And so when you sit down and read a letter that someone has written to you, there is that connection. Just like you feel like when someone's written you a text, just different format.
I always wonder about the way that news traveled then versus now. We have almost on-time delivery of news while it's happening. Right?
True.
And I'm not sure that's how things happened back then. And that makes me think that maybe it was somewhat more peaceful to not have the constant bombardment of what's going on in the world.
The 24/7 cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah, when you received a letter, you could choose when you want to read it versus it just being right in front of your face.
And
constantly.
a newspaper as well.
And the newspaper, you pick it up and you learn as you go.
Now, for urgency's sake, though, we do have several telegrams. And
Yes.
so if something happened that needed to be communicated on an urgent level, it definitely was, that was the method then, was by telegram.
I believe you have a telegram, a condolence telegram.
We have several.
Yeah, you have several.
We have a pile of telegrams.
Yeah, so definitely saved for the important, where today you have to question whether certain of our texts are really all that important. But,
correct, and they're even more urgently sent than the telegram.
Yes,
Telegram probably at least took, a day.
Why didn't Anne get back to me yet?
Yes, exactly.
That was important to me.
But I think many people don't realize that there were 2 mail deliveries every day of the week, on weekdays, not on the weekends. Weekends were very different back then than they are now. And so you could send and receive twice a day.
And be chastised if you didn't send twice a day, perhaps.
And it sounds like some of the scenes that you've written, sketches about Flo, she's sitting with piles of letters around her, too.
Yes.
Right? So,
yes, I'm not sure how she kept all her correspondence straight.
Without a file
sometimes-
system, yeah.
Sometimes we miss text.
Yeah.
What if she sent the wrong letter?
Well, it's kind of interesting, too, how she did sort of personal editing of the letters. You have hundreds of letters, and yet we know we are missing a whole bunch of correspondence that she didn't care to hang on to.
Tell
right?
me more about that. What do you mean?
They're from Reggie. When she let him know that she would not be marrying him, he sent some very, very harsh letters back that absolutely crushed her. And I think that we are going to be seeing a glimpse of that in today's
Spoiler
episode.
alert. I think you
I think so.
I think so. Today's episode is Pickle Resolved. So Flo's going to make her decision here. And I think Anne just tipped our hand a little bit to what that decision is, although you probably figured it out anyway. Anne, let's go to our readings for the week. I will help remind us where we left off in episode 3. We ended with brotherly love and all of the support that Florence was receiving as far as trying to make the decision, and the Mrs. Who sketch where she's writing all these different names out.
And the chat with Mr. Jeffrey.
Chat with Mr. Jeffrey.
Absolutely had to unload.
So she's getting a lot of input.
Yes, and she's got a quandary for sure.
And this week here, we're going to start to learn with Pickle Resolved, how does she resolve this dilemma?
Job 1, November 1921, Miss McClaw's office. Florence, I've called you here today to talk to you about your future and to help prepare you for a possible job interview by conducting a practice one. Florence's eyebrows raise as she begins to respond, but Miss McClaw is not finished and continues. So let's get right to that. I'll start with the first question. Remember to think before you answer and get those shoulders back and your feet squared. She picks up a notepad, puts on her glasses, and assumes the role of interviewer. Florence, thank you for your interest in our organization. Please describe your perfect job. As in work? Oh, no, I'm not here for that. Work outside the home? I've never heard of such a thing. Why would I do that? Florence tilts her head in questioning disbelief. Miss McClaw looks at Florence and pretends she did not hear her question and continues. What are your plans after graduation? Well, you see, I'm not really sure that I am going to graduate or come back at all. I'm currently engaged to 2 beaus and see myself marrying next year sometime. I guess that will be my job. Aghast, the Claw continues her line of questioning, intent on accomplishing the simple task with Florence, and says in quiet exasperation, what assets would you bring to the work environment? Well, I plan to be good, very good at managing a maid. That's what Benny, my suitor who asked me to marry him after I was already engaged to Reggie, I really am as mixed up as a milkshake over this, suggested I focus on instead of learning to cook. I did do quite well in my pickling course, though, and told him we wouldn't starve as long as we have something to pickle. Miss McClaw puts down her notepad, removes her glasses, sighs, puts her head in her hands, and quietly asks the last question on her list. Is there anything else you would like to share about yourself? Florence pauses for a moment and then smiles. Well, I do like to dabble in writing some. My mother writes pageants and plays. I tend to write more about what amuses me, and I have a way with flowers. Mother tells me it takes 2 hours a day to keep fresh flowers in the house, so I guess that will be work. And planning a party. I sure will miss that part of graduation. She sits back, pleased with herself and her ready answers. She looks at Miss McClaw for affirmation and startled to find the matron slumped over, head down, forehead touching her desk. With a wave of surrender, she points to the door and says, Good day, Florence. Please send Shiny in. Pickle Resolved, Sweetbriar Dorm Room, November 1921. Shiny stands outside Florence's dorm room, quietly insistent. Flossie girl, open the door. What on earth is going on? We haven't seen or heard from you since yesterday morning. Don't make me get the Claw to come and open this door. She hears a slight noise, and then some rustling and the sound of the lock releasing. Shiny walks through the doorway to find Florence, heading back towards her bed, covers strewn with assorted pages of letters and envelopes. She brushes everything aside, climbs into bed, turns and faces the window, and pulls the covers over her head. What's happened? Who are these letters from? Is everything okay in Titusville? You are reminding me of me, and that is not okay. Please, talk to me. Florence muffles a groan and slowly starts to uncover herself. She sits up and faces Shiny. I am the absolute worst person in the world, and I have behaved terribly by not being honest with Reggie about Ben for months. And I finally wrote to tell him that I no longer can consider marrying him, and he made me tell him why. And these letters let me show just how horrible a person I am. I do not deserve to be happy with anyone. Just shoot me. Shiny lets Flo weep a bit and then asks, what does Benny have to say about all this? Oh, he's writing me nonstop as well. The way he puts it, I can only marry one person at a time, and he hopes it'll be him. And that true love only happens when it's a mutual feeling. And because it's not mutual with Reggie, then it's not love. And I can tell you one thing, he sure is right about that, because Reggie's love for me sure turned quickly to absolute hate. He detests me with his entire being. Florence and Shiny sit staring at each other, and then Shiny gently smiles. Do you think you can be done with all this by the first supper bell? It's roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, roasted potatoes, and coconut cream pie tonight. We'll go early for the rare bits. Even the most despicable girl in the world needs to eat. Let's get you dressed. How not, my dear? Sweetbriar Dorm Room, November 1921. Oh dear, maybe I'm being a tad too hard on Benny, Florence shares with Shiny. He writes I want to smoke so much I could howl. She muses for a moment. Maybe giving up alcohol and cigarettes at the same time might be too much. I don't want a vampire visiting me when I return home. Shiny fluffs Florence's pillow and leans back on her bed. Didn't your brother say something about being critical for the right reasons? What does it matter to you if Ben smokes or drinks? Since when are you such a goody-goody priss? Well, it just seems when he gets in the cup, so to speak, he can be a bit unpleasant, especially towards my friends, and that's something that I cannot abide. So he can smoke and drink all he wants as long as he remains civil. Florence sits down and begins to write Ben to inform him there is no reason to start to howl. After a moment, she puts her pen down. You know, this trying to change people or not can work both ways. I want to cut my hair into a bob with all the rest of the girls next week, but Ben is trying to talk me into waiting until after Christmas. Is that considered constructive? I think not. Bring on the shears, I say. The Engagement Ride. Train from Titusville to Buffalo, New York, January 1922. Florence Benjamin and his Aunt Jeanette stand on the Titusville platform, closely knit to ward off the blustery January chill. The train pulls in and Mr. Jeffrey steps out. Florence hurriedly moves to greet him ahead of the other two. Oh, Mr. Jeffrey, everything is splendid. We are on our way to Buffalo to pick out my engagement ring. Isn't that just divine? Mr. Jeffrey starts arranging her bags and looks up at her as the others approach, winks and says, You sure did a fine job with that eraser, and then announces to the group, All aboard. Let me show you to your car.
A lot, again, in all of those readings. I love you did a fine job with the eraser. She had to erase one of the two.
Yep, she did.
Even though they were shorter this week, we hit on some pretty big topics. Let's start at the beginning, okay? The women in the workplace concept here. Miss McClaw is trying to get Florence and probably others ready for interviews. Sweet. And yet she's not really ready to be interviewed, is she?
Yes, she's not really ready to have a job.
I don't think she went to Sweetbriar to prepare for the world of work. I think at that time, liberal arts colleges like Sweetbriar were an opportunity for people to just continue their development and learn skills and learn to become better human beings, more well-rounded.
And educated.
And educated, absolutely. And I think that's part of the problem with what's happening with liberal arts education now, is that so much pressure is being placed on the idea of being prepared for a job when you leave college. The world's changing.
And I think also that Sweetbriar might have been on the leading edge of how they might prepare women for the world, like Miss McClaw's hopeful that they are going to produce women who are going to go out and be leaders in the world, as their motto says now. And that they're on just the brink of that, where, okay, we're going to study the arts and the humanities and Latin and history and have all of these women are going to be well educated. But I think Sweetbriar might have been the place that they were starting to try to push it forward a little bit.
So here we are. It's time again for fact or fiction. It's time for fact or historical fiction. I've got a little series of fact or fiction questions here. I'm thinking, first of all, did Flo literally ask Ben to quit smoking and drinking? Do you know that? Is that a fact, or is that just something that you kind of came up with?
That's a fact, and I'll bring the letter to prove it next episode.
All right. Sounds good.
It's a direct quote.
It's a direct quote.
It's a direct quote.
So we'll have a from the source on that one.
We will.
That'll be fun to look forward to because it sounds kind of interesting. And then, she's talking about trying to change others, because in that concept, Florence is recognizing it's kind of hard to change others, right? And for others to change you. And honestly, you really can only control yourself and how you react to things.
I think that was her brother's whole message to her. I think the word was out that she was going to fix, Butch before he, would consider marrying him. And I think his whole premise was, how you choose to criticize and what is your intent, and is it with purpose of positivity, or are you being negative? And I think that the result of her trying to change Ben came back to her with, he's turning into a creature that she wasn't going to recognize,
right?
And that scared her.
Also, from the sketches, from that first sketch, Job 1. What about Flo's mother writing pageants and plays? Is that actual fact?
Oh, yes. Yes, we have all of Louise's writings. She asked her daughter to hold on to them, and she was a prolific writer. And she wrote very civic-oriented pageants and plays. She was quite a thinker. She was a suffragette.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And she was concerned with world and global events, starving people in Turkey. We have plays, and
the play about the hats and women's fashion is pretty funny.
It's a satire. It's called Hairdressings and Hats, and it's a spoof on women in the late 1800s and early 1900s following Paris fashions. And what's so amazing about these writings is that she also has all the production notes, and she sketched out these exaggerated hats that she created. Like one was an Easter basket or Easter hat made out of chicken wire with all sorts of rubber ducks and paraphernalia attached to it. So every detail of her pageant, we could produce it.
I was going to say, this should go in the show notes. Do we have pictures too?
Yeah, we can share some pictures of her.
Share some pictures. Yeah. This is going to be fun.
It is literally a production that we could put on because we have all of the directions to do it.
Do you know that they were ever produced? Yes. Do you think they were performed? They were?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my goodness.
She was a part of the women's club in Titusville, and they met on a monthly basis and did programs every month. And Lou was very instrumental in presenting a number of these programs.
And pageants. And she would, gather all the youth in the community, and she would have, she made Ben do one, and then he quit. He was a dancer and he just wasn't. So she would put on these big, big presentations.
And that was the television of that. That was a form of entertainment for the community. Thousands of people would attend.
You also mentioned in the sketch about her answer, what are you going to do? Well, I kind of do some creative writing. Do you have any evidence of Florence doing creative writing?
We have some. They're wonderful. She had a great wit. There's, I think maybe for our bonus episodes later, Betsy suggested let's read some of Florence's writing because
I would love to hear that.
Yeah, it's
brilliant.
Well, and that'll be fun to hear your grandmother's writing after going through this series of your writings and to really kind of see maybe some of that rubbed off a little bit somehow.
Yes, what's interesting about her mother, she was very serious. She was, the suffragette. She's going to, just address the world's problems, paper by paper, one at a time. And Florence was much more introspective of her, like self-deprecating and making fun of herself in some ways, or seeing humor in a situation.
Florence also had an element of sassiness, maybe, or rebellion. And I think one example of that is what you just read about her bobbing her hair. That in the 1920s was an act of rebellion. Long hair was desirable by men, and women would bob their hair to be a form of independence, I guess. And it's kind of interesting because the hair bobbing trend actually had an economic impact on women's business at that time, because prior to the hair bobbing, think about hair salons. It was just a matter of trimming, right? Once hair bobbing became a practice, that became a whole form of employment for women in opening up these hair salons in the 1920s.
And every one of the women on the wall, they have the same haircut. They're bobbed. And
they're all bobbed.
They're all bobbed. And we have letters from my grandfather begging my grandmother not to bob her hair until after Christmas. And then a letter from my great-grandmother, so from Louise to Florence, saying, and she addressed the letters, "Dear Bobby." So it told us that she went ahead and had her hair bobbed before Christmas.
Oh, I love it. Right. But so if you look at the album art, Meet Me at the Wall, all these women lined up, all bobbed. So that was exactly at this same time that we're talking about here with the engagement and the whole knot. And wow.
And women choosing which direction they're going in.
I haven't heard enough about bobbed hair right now. So Betsy, can you give us a little more? You seem to have delved into this pretty deep.
Somewhere along the way, I remembered that hair bobbing was this form of female rebellion in the 1920s. And so I did a little bit of research on it and found out that it actually started in 1915 when a ballroom dancer named Irene Castle was facing a surgery. She had an illness and required a surgery for recovery. And so she decided at that time that her recovery would be easier if she cut her hair, so she wouldn't have to deal with the washing of the hair, which was kind of a big deal back then.
Brushing. I think you always see that in the movies, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So she did this. And then after she recovered, her hair was short and she was embarrassed, so she would wear a turban. And she was a pretty famous ballroom dancer, sort of starlet icon, fashion icon of the time. And her friends ultimately persuaded her to take the turban off. Let's see what's going on there. And she did. Went out to dinner with them. And basically this short bobbed hairdo became an overnight success and fashion rage.
Wow.
And which Flo took up in the 1920s. And I'm kind of proud of her for that. I love that little form of rebellion.
Otherwise known as Bobby.
Bobby, yes. Her mother called her Bobby.
Yeah, I think it's just another great way that these women put that horrible, very recent past behind them with the World War I ending and the pandemic ending, and just like, let's make everything new and fresh and different.
Picking up from what their mothers had done with the suffragettes and getting the vote. And this was another step towards female independence.
I think we've made some progress in the last 100 years, but probably not enough.
Go girls.
I like it. This time goes so fast. As we think about next week, and before we go here, just a quick question. Do you like weddings?
Sure.
Sure.
Do you like going to weddings?
Yeah.
Well,
Sure.
I think every great series or TV show has had a wedding episode, right? I mean,
Right.
if you think about it, back to the ER days or all the different shows over the years. Well, next week, now that the pickle is resolved,
Oh, that's right.
now we have a wedding episode next time.
Yay.
We do.
So as we sign off, just a little teaser here that next time we're going to get to experience Flo and Ben's wedding a little bit.
Yes.
See you then.
Yes. Get your gifts. Get registered, too. Where would they have registered, do you think? Or did they register? Do you know?
Titusville had 2 renowned silversmiths. And so there was a lot of silver in Titusville, Pennsylvania for some reason. And when we see pictures of wedding gifts on display, I think a lot of it in Titusville was silver-based.
Well, so as guests now, we need to go out to the silver store and get ready for next week.
Right. Well,
Yes.
I've researched some of those bowls
Yeah.
on the internet, and it would be a generous gift.
Okay, great. Anne, thank you again.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Betsy.
Thank you. It's always fun to be here.
Meet Me at the Wall is hosted by Doug Martinet, Anne Goodwin, and Betsy Schmeeken. Music is written and performed by Alex Vance. This podcast is copyright 2025 by Pleasurable Pause Press. Thank you for listening, and we hope you tune in again next time.